Good morning, Falcons. It's Mr. K from the library. Today, I've got a piece of nonfiction for you. It's called Boys of Steel, the creators of Superman. It's written by Mark Tyler Nobleman and illustrated by Ross McDonald. This is the story of the creation of the Superman comic books, movies, television, all of that. Most days, Jerry Siegel slipped into the halls of his high school, staring at the floor. He always wished he were going in the other direction, back home. That's where he could be with his friends. They were an extraordinary bunch. One saved lives in the jungle. One saved lives in space. One saved lives in the future. But Tarzan, Flash Gordon, and Buck Rogers were fictional characters. They saved other fictional characters in pulp magazines and comic strips. They couldn't save anyone in the real world, where millions of people were struggling to find jobs during the Great Depression of the 1930s. They couldn't save Jerry's father, who had died of heart failure during an after-hours robbery in his clothing store in Cleveland. Jerry read amazing stories every evening, every weekend, every chance he got. If he wasn't reading, he was watching. The cinemas had no shortage of rousing motion pictures about daredevils who laughed at danger, and when he should have been paying attention in class, he let his thoughts drift to galaxies yet to be explored. None of it helped him miss his father less, but it did distract him from the sadness for a little while. Jerry also wrote his adventure and science fiction stories. He'd pound away at his typewriter by the front window in his attic. From there, he could see boys playing ball, flirting with girls on the street below. Jerry wasn't good at those things. He had crushes on girls who didn't know or didn't even care that he existed. Some of them look like they hope I don't exist, Jerry thought. Jerry was shy. Unless he could talk about muscle men or detectives or jetpacks or ray guns or any other champions or gadgets he'd read about. But the kids he knew weren't interested in those weird tales, and they ignored Jerry. Jerry and Joe could have passed for brothers. Both were short, both wore glasses. Like Jerry, Joe was lousy at sports and mousy around girls. He, too, was shy, almost painfully so. And he, too, escaped to other worlds in pulps and strips, then made up his own worlds as well. But he did it with pictures, not words. While Jerry was typing in his attic, Joe was drawing in his kitchen, using a breadboard as a surface. Joe often illustrated Jerry's stories. No matter the obstacle, Joe found a way to draw. When his family couldn't afford art paper, he made do with wrapping paper from the butcher, or the back of discarded wallpaper. In winter, because the Schuster's apartment had no heat, he drew while he bundled in several sweaters, 1 or 2 coats, even gloves. It wasn't just kids that didn't understand Jerry and Joe. One of Jerry's teachers told him he was wasting his time writing what she called trash. But Jerry sensed that these stories were important. In life, people got pushed around. Children lost parents. Criminals got away. In stories, heroes could prevent all of them. And Jerry had a plan. If he and Joe could come up with a colorful new character, they could produce a comic strip about him, and maybe sell it to a newspaper syndicate. The partners crafted a science fiction story in cartoons. It starred a brave, tough man who fought for truth and justice. But that wasn't enough to make him stand out from the many other men of action that already were on the newsstands. After only one publisher said no to Jerry and Joe's concept, Joe tore up the pages in disappointment. Jerry managed to save the cover. Late one summer in 1933, Jerry couldn't sleep. The air sagged from the heat. That was not why Jerry was still awake. What if I was real terrific, Jerry thought? What if I had something special going for me, like jumping over buildings or throwing cars around? Then maybe people would notice me. Jerry knew he would never be able to do anything like that, but suddenly he was struck with the idea of a hero who could. He hopped up to scribble it down. After he flopped back into bed, more vivid details about this hero began flickering in his brain. 2 hours later, he sprang up again, stumbled, and wrote those ideas down. The character would be like Samson, Hercules, and all the strong men Jerry had ever heard of rolled into one, only more so, he thought. But he would not be a man in the jungle, in space, or in the future. Actually, he would not be a man at all. He would be an alien. Not a slimy green giant with 200 eyes that prowled the distant moon and snacked on astronauts. Rather, an alien who protected humans. An alien who actually looked human. An alien who came from far away from Earth, the real Earth, the Great Depression Earth. That was something different. The other heroes Jerry and Joe read about were regular humans in strange places. This hero would be a stranger in a regular place. He would have impenetrable skin, phenomenal speed, tremendous agility, like, say, a habit of leaping so high it would look like he was flying. Joe would like that. The hero would have the confidence to speak to any woman. Joe would really like that. But even heroes need a break, so this one had a secret identity. He would be meek and mild, like Joe and I are, and wear glasses like we do, Jerry thought. No one would guess that such a hero was also someone like them. Before dawn, Jerry tugged on his clothes over his pajamas. He dashed out without eating. Jerry didn't run much, but that morning he ran faster than a speeding bullet, 9.5 blocks to Joe's apartment. In breathless spurts, Jerry described to Joe what he'd imagined. When he was done, Jerry pushed his glasses back up on his nose. He ripped out a sheet from his notebook and handed it to Joe, who grabbed a pencil. Joe leaned close to the paper, as he usually did, and Jerry leaned over Joe's shoulder, as he usually did. Even with his glasses on, Joe squinted. He began to sketch. His vision was blurry, but his art wasn't. In seconds, the hero in Jerry's mind was coming to life on Joe's page. Just as Jerry had written all night, Joe kept drawing all day. His eyes grew tired before his hand, but he was too excited to stop. Jerry had known this hero would be strong, but it was not until he gazed at Joe's designs that he realized how strong. He would be strong as steel. And because they had created him, Jerry and Joe felt as strong as steel too. Their hero was more than good, even more than great. They studied his costume. Let's put something on the front, Joe said. They decided on S for super, and S for Siegel and Schuster, Jerry said. The boys thought the hero might be their big idea. They prepared a series of comic strips about him and again set out to find a publisher. For more than 3 years, editors turned them down. Finally, one said yes. His company was putting out a new type of magazine called a comic book. He asked Jerry and Joe if they would rearrange their comic strips to fit that format. They happily agreed. One of the owners took a look at Joe's cover drawing and shook his head. Nobody's going to believe this, he said. But Jerry and Joe believed it, just as they believed Tarzan could yak with apes, and Flash Gordon could move to another planet, and Buck Rogers could wake from a coma after 500 years. The Great Depression had lasted nearly a decade. Now a world war was brewing. Every day, people were about to be called to duty. And many would prove to be real-life heroes. But if there was ever a time for a fantasy hero, particularly one with powers and abilities far beyond those of mortal men, it was then. People wanted a hero they knew would always come home. Jerry and Joe gave them that, the world's first superhero. He debuted in 1938. His comic book was an instant hit. Soon he also won fans in a comic strip, on the radio, in animated shorts, in books, in movie serials. When television caught on, he got a show there too. He continued to soar, up, up and away. Some people look at the sky and see a bird or a plane, but nothing beyond. In the trying days of yesteryear, Jerry and Joe looked up and saw a star no one had discovered before. They brought him to Earth and watched him become a superstar. Today, on every story where his name appears, theirs do, too. The end.